The paper slid across my kitchen table with the sound of a verdict being delivered. "Sign these today," Vivian Hartwell said calmly, her manicured finger resting on the foreclosure notice, "or the bank takes your farm tomorrow." That table wasn't just furniture. My great-grandfather built it in 1899, the same year he broke ground on this land with his own hands. For generations had eaten here, argued here, planned futures here. And now, standing in my kitchen like she owned the place, Vivian Hartwell, HOA president, real estate empress, suburban queen, was trying to erase all of it with a smile sharpened by money and arrogance. "This land is worth millions now, Mr. Blackstone," she said. "Time to move on." Then she turned, heels clicking with practiced authority, stepped into her white Mercedes, and drove off, certain she'd won. What she didn't know was that 20 years earlier, I had quietly walked away from Wall Street with more wealth than most people would ever see. I didn't retire loud. I didn't buy yachts or penthouses. I made private investments, silent ones. Investments that gave me influence over far more than 40 acres of farmland. She'd just declared war on the wrong man. Let me rewind. 20 years ago, I was a predator in a different ecosystem. On Wall Street, I specialized in buying dying regional banks, institutions bleeding cash, ignored by giants, written off as doomed. I'd sweep in, buy controlling interest for pennies, restructure them, and turn them profitable. When the 2008 financial collapse hit and Regional Trust Bank was hemorrhaging money like a ruptured artery, I bought control for less than the price of a luxury sedan. Here was the beauty of it. I never told anyone I owned it. Management believed a mysterious New York investment group was behind the curtain. I stayed invisible. Then, when my great-grandfather's farm passed to me, 40 acres untouched by time, I left finance behind and chose peace. Morning roosters replaced trading floor alarms. I traded spreadsheets for soil, contracts for carrots. Heritage chickens wandered between heirloom tomatoes. Suburban lawnmowers hummed in the distance while my land stayed defiantly rural. The only stress I knew was whether a rooster crowed too early and annoyed the neighbors. Life was perfect. Until Vivian Hartwell arrived. She built her empire aggressively. A 180-home subdivision, Hartwell Meadows, rose around my property like a concrete noose. Roads bent awkwardly to avoid my land. Buyers complained about agricultural odors, as if food had no right to exist outside grocery aisles. Vivian hated my farm because it cost her millions in development compromises. She tried buying me out early. Stupid money. Life-changing money. I refused. My great-grandfather's will was clear: no developers. Ever. Somehow, a man born before airplanes had predicted suburban hell with eerie precision. Vivian was 47, razor-sharp, ruthless, living in a corner mansion designed to intimidate reality itself. Every morning, she stared out her floor-to-ceiling windows at my weathered farmhouse like it was a personal insult. The smell of manure drifting across her manicured paradise must have burned worse than failure. So she changed tactics. She came armed with paperwork, official-looking, stamped, terrifying. According to her, I owed $12,000 in retroactive HOA fees dating back 5 years, plus $50,000 in penalties for violating covenants that didn't exist when my great-grandfather was building chicken coops. The documents were designed to scare people who didn't understand finance. She'd convinced officers at Regional Trust Bank that my century-old property had been reclassified into HOA jurisdiction through a boundary revision in 2010. Banks don't care about history. They care about numbers. Pay or lose everything. What made my blood burn wasn't the lie. It was the delivery. She'd weaponized my own bank against me. Employees I paid, unknowingly to them, had fed her foreclosure procedures and leverage points. She'd turned my institution into her personal attack dog. She believed I was a helpless old farmer. The next morning, I walked into Regional Trust Bank, not as owner, not yet, just a confused man seeking answers. The lobby still smelled like polished marble and quiet desperation. I'd designed it years ago, back when I thought banking helped communities instead of destroying them. Janet Morrison, the loan officer, nearly dropped her coffee when she saw me. "Mr. Blackstone. Thank goodness you're here. We must discuss your account irregularities." Her hands shook. That told me everything. I asked one simple question. How does a property older than zoning laws owe money to an HOA that didn't exist? She stammered. Claimed Vivian provided comprehensive documentation. When I asked to review it, Janet turned pale. The documents were in Vivian's possession. That afternoon, I made phone calls to people I trusted, experts in tracing money, uncovering lies buried in ledgers and shell companies. What they found was breathtaking. Vivian hadn't just lied about my land. She'd been inflating appraisals across the entire subdivision. Borrowing against fantasy values. PowerPoint numbers. Cocaine-fueled projections. Her development loans violated federal regulations so aggressively they read like satire. Every loan carried her personal guarantee. She wasn't attacking my farm because she hated chickens. She was drowning. And my land was her last life raft. That realization changed everything. While I built my case, Vivian launched a propaganda campaign, warning residents of community collapse if I wasn't stopped. Property values, mortgages, futures, she terrified them into silence. People looked at me like I was contagious. But desperation makes criminals sloppy. That night, Mrs. Kowalski, 78, sharp as broken glass, knocked on my door. She brought photographs and a sworn affidavit request. Vivian had offered to pay her HOA fees, 2 full years, if she'd testify that my chickens were a health hazard. That was the moment Vivian crossed from fraud into criminal insanity. She'd tried to steal my heritage. Now she was soliciting perjury from seniors. And she had no idea the person she targeted controlled the financial ground beneath her feet. War had officially begun. The next morning, I walked back into Regional Trust Bank carrying nothing more threatening than a briefcase and patience sharpened by 20 years in finance. The conference room smelled like panic disguised as fresh coffee. The branch manager, Tom Williams, tried to smile. Janet sat rigid, eyes fixed on the polished table like it might swallow her whole. "Gentlemen," I said evenly, spreading documents across the mahogany surface, "we need to discuss why this bank attempted to foreclose on property for debts that do not legally exist." Silence followed, the kind that makes clocks sound like countdown devices. I explained something every banker learns in training and too many forget in practice. Independent verification isn't optional. It's federal law. Banks don't accept claims because someone sounds confident and drives an expensive car. Janet finally whispered the truth. They had relied entirely on Vivian's documentation. I slid another folder forward. "Then you're complicit in fraud." By that afternoon, I had assembled evidence so damning it could have shut down the bank entirely. Inflated appraisals. Backdated boundary revisions. Loan approvals rubber-stamped so recklessly they bordered on parody. Every trail ended the same way, with Vivian Hartwell. But the true revelation wasn't her fraud. It was her guarantees. She'd personally guaranteed loans exceeding her net worth by millions. Everything she owned, mansion, cars, jewelry, assets, was collateral. She wasn't conquering suburbs. She was desperately treading water. That explained her escalation. That explained the bullying. That explained me. Meanwhile, Vivian was working the neighborhood like a dictator running a fear campaign. She warned residents of collapsing home values, loan recalls, mortgage ruin. People panicked. Some stopped meeting my eyes. Others looked at my farm like it was radioactive. Then she made another mistake. Mrs. Kowalski brought proof. Vivian had tried to bribe her into lying, offering financial incentives for false testimony against me. Elder abuse. Witness tampering. Federal crimes stacked neatly atop fraud. That was the moment strategy replaced anger. That night, I accessed Regional Trust's internal systems, not to interfere, but to observe. Emails leapt off the screen. Private correspondence between Vivian and loan officers discussing flexibility in lending standards. Cash deposits appearing in personal accounts after approvals. A recorded call where compensation for regulatory blind eyes was openly discussed. In banking law, recordings like that aren't evidence. They're confessions. Even worse, corporate filings revealed Vivian's development company was secretly controlled by her ex-husband's bankruptcy attorney, the same man who'd helped her hide money during their divorce. It wasn't just fraud. It was conspiracy. I organized everything by statute. Each folder represented another year in federal prison. Then I made the call. FDIC Fraud Investigation Unit. Within 24 hours, federal examiners descended on regional trust bank like surgeons attacking a tumor. They dissected 4 years of lending practices with surgical precision. Vivian didn't know yet. She paced her mansion, still believing intimidation could save her. On the 4th morning, the senior examiner called me personally. This case will be taught in law enforcement academies for decades. When I arrived at the bank, boxes of evidence lined the lobby. Agents moved with quiet confidence. The conference table groaned under the weight of felonies. $47 million in fraudulent lending. All guaranteed by one woman. Then came the twist. She's liquidating assets, the examiner said. Offshore transfers. Cayman accounts. Crypto wallets. She's preparing to flee. That's when my silence became a weapon. I pulled out my phone. As owner of the bank, I froze her accounts. All international transfers halted. Wire privileges revoked. The examiner stared at me. You can do that. I own the bank. The room went dead silent. Vivian had been stealing from the person who controlled her mortgage, her credit, and every financial lever in her world. But federal justice moves slowly, and panic moves fast. That evening, I gathered my allies in the barn my great-grandfather built, the same place he'd probably planned battles of his own. Mrs. Kowalski arrived first, fierce and focused. She threatened the wrong grandmother, she said. This neighborhood is done being afraid. Dimitri followed, carrying photographs of construction violations severe enough to condemn half the subdivision. Sarah brought petitions, emergency audits, resident outrage. Together, we planned a coordinated strike. Tuesday morning, county inspections expose violations requiring immediate repairs. Tuesday afternoon, Sarah forces an emergency HOA meeting demanding financial disclosure. Tuesday evening, I trigger default clauses on Vivian's guarantees. She'll try to run, Mrs. Kowalski warned. Already handled, I said. Her money can't move. Federal marshals are watching. Tuesday arrived on schedule. Inspectors swarmed the subdivision. Violations appeared everywhere. Cracked infrastructure, unsafe drainage, corners cut to oblivion. By noon, Vivian was facing repair costs larger than her remaining liquidity. Then my phone rang. A detective wanted to investigate me. Accusations of intimidation, abuse of banking authority. Vivian's last attempt to flip the board. 3 hours later, the detective sat at my kitchen table staring at evidence that made his job embarrassingly clear. That evening, residents packed the community center for the emergency HOA meeting. And outside Vivian's mansion, a moving truck idled. Boxes marked urgent and priority were being loaded under cover of darkness. When I arrived, I saw more than furniture. HOA financial records. Resident. Personal files. Bank data. She wasn't fleeing prosecution. She was exporting stolen identities. I called federal investigators as sirens appeared in the distance. Vivian reached into her purse and raised a USB drive like a detonator. One move, she shouted, and I release everything. She didn't realize the drive was accessing a network I controlled. I shut it down remotely. Her face collapsed in real time. Agents moved in. She ran. A hidden Mercedes roared from the garage, tires screaming as she vanished into the night. Vivian Hartwell, HOA president, suburban tyrant, had just transformed into an international fugitive. And the Real chase had begun. By Wednesday morning, Hartwell Meadows woke up to a new reality. Vivian Hartwell was gone. The woman who once ruled the subdivision with spreadsheets, threats, and manicured cruelty had vanished into the shadows, leaving behind half-packed rooms, abandoned evidence, and a community rattled by the word no one wanted attached to their neighborhood, fugitive. Patricia called me just after dawn. She ditched the Mercedes 20 miles outside the city, she said, her voice strained with professional frustration. Airport footage confirms she boarded a private jet under a false identity. We didn't even know the passport existed. I stared out my kitchen window at the fields my family had worked for over a century, coffee cooling in my hand. How much did she take? I asked. 2.3 million in offshore accounts, Patricia replied. And a USB drive containing personal data on every family in your subdivision. Social security numbers. Bank details. Medical records. Enough to ruin hundreds of lives. The helicopters arrived before noon, black shapes circling Hartwell Meadows like mechanical vultures. News vans followed. Satellite dishes bloomed on sidewalks. By afternoon, the subdivision was nationally known as the place where an HOA president became an international fugitive. Fear spread faster than facts. For sale signs appeared like weeds after rain. Mrs. Patterson called in tears, certain her life savings were gone. The Hendersons started packing before lunch. Neighbors whispered about mortgage defaults, blacklisted properties, permanent stigma. The community was spiraling. And that's when I realized something critical. They didn't need updates. They needed leadership. That night, I called an emergency neighborhood meeting. No lawyers. No intimidation. Just people. The community center filled beyond capacity. Nearly every homeowner showed up. Faces tight with worry. Hands clenched. Futures trembling. I stood where Vivian once stood when she'd weaponized fear. I know you're scared, I said. Some of you are thinking about leaving tonight. But here's what you need to understand. The room went silent. As owner of Regional Trust Bank, I am personally guaranteeing every mortgage in this subdivision. Your homes are safe. Your equity is protected. Vivian Hartwell will not destroy this community from wherever she's hiding. The relief hit like oxygen returning to a suffocating room. People exhaled. Some cried. Others laughed nervously, as if their bodies hadn't yet caught up with the news. Behind the scenes, the manhunt escalated. Vivian was spotted in the Cayman Islands arguing with hotel staff about luxury accommodations. Apparently, even as a fugitive, she demanded premium service. Federal marshals coordinated with 6 countries. Forensic accountants traced money through shell companies nested inside shell companies, each one screaming guilt. Then came the revelation. Her divorce had been fake. Her ex-husband wasn't an ex at all, he was a co-conspirator. Their bankruptcy attorney wasn't incompetent. He was laundering millions through legal fees. What began as fraud expanded into a full-blown RICO case, organized criminal enterprise charges that stripped away any hope of escape. 3 weeks later, Patricia called again. They'd found her. Costa Rican authorities arrested Vivian at a luxury resort, living under a stolen identity, spending stolen money, hiding from consequences she'd spent years believing would never touch her. She was coming home. The federal courthouse looked like a historic event unfolding in real time. Media everywhere. Residents lined up before dawn. Mrs. Kowalski wore her best dress. Dimitri held a sign that read, "Criminals belong in prison, not presidential suites." Sarah carried folders thick with testimony. When the transport arrived, silence fell. Vivian stepped out in orange. Shackled. Smaller. Stripped of power. The woman who once terrorized neighbors with legal threats now blinked under camera flashes like prey caught in daylight. That night, the community center filled again, this time with resolve. The U.S. attorney laid it all out. Over 4 years, Vivian Hartwell embezzled over $1 million from HOA reserves. Defrauded Regional Trust Bank of $47 million. Stole personal identity data from 180 families for potential sale to criminal networks. Gasps rippled across the room. Then came the words no one expected. Due to extraordinary cooperation and asset recovery, the prosecutor said, we are pleased to announce that 100% of stolen funds will be returned, plus interest. The room erupted. Applause. Cheers. Tears. Strangers hugged like survivors of a shared storm. Then the attorney called me to the podium. And revealed the truth. That I owned the bank. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at faces filled with shock, gratitude, and understanding. For months ago, I said, Vivian Hartwell tried to steal my family's farm using fake debt and fraudulent claims. What she didn't know was that she was threatening the person who controlled the financial foundation of this entire subdivision. Cameras recorded every word. "Vivian," I continued, looking directly into the lens, "your foreclosure papers are denied. Your operation is over. And this community is done being afraid." 6 months later, her mansion was gone. In its place stood a community garden. Children harvested vegetables where intimidation once lived. Families laughed where fear once ruled. Mortgage payments dropped after restructuring. Property values rose, not because of manipulation, but trust. Mrs. Kowalski became HOA president, unopposed. Transparency replaced secrecy. Dimitri rebuilt infrastructure properly. Sarah founded a scholarship for ethical finance. And every Tuesday morning, seniors drank coffee at my kitchen table, the same table Vivian tried to use as a weapon. Hartwell Meadows had survived something rare, a financial predator. And in doing so, it had rediscovered its soul. 6 months after the sirens faded and the cameras moved on, silence returned to Hartwell Meadows, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the tense quiet of fear, or the brittle calm of people afraid to speak. This silence carried laughter under it. Wind through garden rows. Children arguing over who watered the tomatoes last. The slow, honest sounds of a community that had stopped bracing for impact. Vivian Hartwell's federal trial unfolded exactly as prosecutors predicted, and exactly as she deserved. There were no dramatic defenses, no clever loopholes, no last-minute rescues. Just documents. Emails. Audio recordings. Financial trails so meticulously mapped they might as well have been confession letters. The courtroom became a public autopsy of arrogance. 4 years of fraud laid bare, slide by slide, number by number. The verdict was swift. 24 months in federal prison. Full restitution. Asset seizure so complete that even the designer coffee machines were listed. Her co-conspirator husband received 18 months. The attorney who enabled the scheme was disbarred before being sentenced himself. Every dollar stolen was clawed back. Not most of it. All of it. The recovery surpassed expectations. Principal, interest, and damages returned to homeowners who once believed they'd never see that money again. The fear that had haunted dinner conversations and sleepless nights dissolved into something almost unfamiliar. Relief. As owner of Regional Trust Bank, I restructured every mortgage in the subdivision. Interest rates lowered. Terms extended. Monthly payments dropped by an average of $400 per household. Home ownership stopped feeling like a trap and started feeling like what it was supposed to be, a foundation, not a threat. Property values climbed, not because of inflated appraisals or fantasy numbers, but because trust had returned. The mansion that once loomed like a monument to intimidation was demolished. In its place grew a community garden, sunlight breaking where shadows once lived. Raised beds replaced marble floors. Compost replaced litigation. It was poetic in a way no courtroom ever could be. Mrs. Kowalski, elected unanimously as permanent HOA president, ran meetings the opposite of Vivian. Financial statements were posted publicly, line by line. Every dollar accounted for. Every decision voted on. Her board meetings became famous, not for conflict, but for transparency and homemade pierogi. Dimitri led infrastructure reconstruction the way it should have been done from the start. No shortcuts, no cosmetic fixes. Roads were rebuilt to last decades. Drainage finally worked. The sound of machinery no longer signaled deception, but repair. Sarah established the Hartwell Heritage Scholarship Fund using recovered funds. The first recipient planned to study sustainable community banking, someone who understood that finance could either suffocate neighborhoods or help them breathe. The broader impact rippled outward. Other communities reached out, HOAs struggling under similar tyrants, quietly wondering if what happened here could happen there. State legislators began drafting financial transparency laws. Banking regulators used the case as training material. Regional trust became a model, not for profit extraction, but for how institutions should serve the people who rely on them. But the real victory wasn't legal. It was human. Children played outside without parents worrying about violation notices. Neighbors talked face to face instead of through lawyers. Block parties replaced emergency meetings. Elderly residents found safety not in documents, but in community, knowing someone would answer the door if they knocked. On Tuesday mornings, Mrs. Patterson and her friends still gathered in my kitchen. Coffee, stories, laughter. They liked sitting at the same table where Vivian once tried to take everything, because it reminded them that intimidation only works until someone refuses to be afraid. At sunset, I often stood by the fence line of my great-grandfather's farm, watching light stretch across the soil he broke with his hands more than a century ago. I thought about how close that legacy came to being erased, not by progress, but by greed wearing a tailored suit. And I understood something I hadn't before. Revenge isn't about destruction. It's about correction. It's about restoring balance where someone tried to replace it with fear. It's about choosing community over control, transparency over power, service over theft. Vivian Hartwell didn't just lose her freedom. She lost the illusion that intimidation could ever substitute for leadership. The farm still stands. The community thrives. And the lesson remains. When someone tries to steal your heritage, sometimes the strongest response isn't anger. It's standing your ground long enough for the truth to bury them.